right, Dragon Empire Visible Ride Line along with Venus Luquier reveal out of nowhere. So let's begin. But first, cards for the last few days. So we start off with Spark Spike Dragon, which is grade 1 with keep power and skills. Count, if your Vanguard is Narukami, this card also becomes Narukami. And that's going to be a theme of all these new type of non-clan cards becoming part of the clan. But anyway, second skill, Count Rearguard. If your Vanguard is Narukami, all your rearguards in the same column as this unit gets was 5k power. If your Vanguard attack hits 2 or more times, aka the Vermilion, plus 10k instead. That itself is pretty good, especially to give your rearguards big beefy attacks. Especially if you're doing something like Rising Phoenix or the promo card that can superior call itself mid-battle. Yeah, it's gonna get some extra attacks with some extra power buff. But anyway, third skill, Auto Rearguard. If the in-battle this unit boosts, if your Vanguard's attacks hit at least 2 times, costs Energy Blast 3 to draw a card. Aka it's the Vermilion, and Energy Blasting 3 to draw a card isn't too bad. Overall, just a nice new card for Vermilion. And now to the Tuesday stream, let's start off with Premium Stride deck set products. Here is Harry and the Ride Line, along with the big boss unit of set 6, which of course will be the Stride Fusion. And here's Night Rose, along with the Ride Line, and here's the Stride Fusion, which is going to be the finisher of course. A bit disappointed that we didn't get basically like the Luard case where we get the second form, although the second form was never shown in the anime, so I'll just give it a pass. But overall pretty cool. And now to the new Ema Aizawa Ride Line. Here's the starter, the first map, Ema Aizawa, in which we go to the grade 1 with K power, working rookie shrine maiden Ema Aizawa, which has the skill where when your Vanguard is visible, it gets all these following abilities of Count Vanguard. When your opponent has 1 or less rearguards, you can ride your grade 2 Ema from your ride deck without discarding a card from your hand, which is not too bad, which makes it basically free and punishes your opponent for not having rearguards basically. But the second part of the skill is auto when rolled upon by the grade 2, and your opponent has 2 or more rearguards, soul charge 2. So basically it's like Gandiva. If your opponent decides not to set up the field, you get to ride for free, but if your opponent does set up the field, you get some extra bonuses. Which gives a little spoiler of this ride line where it focuses around basically rearguard removal on your opponent. In which we go to the grade 2 with 10k power, Exorcism, Lightning, Fire, Ema Aizawa, which has the skill of if your Vanguard is visible, it gets all the following abilities where when rolled upon by the grade 3, search your deck for up to 1 total Kagura and call it to rearguard and of course of her deck, aka call her partner, just like all the other grade 2s. And the second skill is auto rearguard. When your grade 3 Vanguard attacks, this card gets 5k power in the end turn, which will actually indicate some restanding Vanguard because it says when your grade 3 Vanguard attacks and it's not once per turn. And you might end up running more copies of this because of this skill, because being a huge beat stick is no joke at all. In which we go to the grade 3 where 13 power, Sunlight Galaxy Ema Aizawa, which has the skill Act Vanguard. Once per turn, costs Soul Blast 2, draw a card, choose one of your opponent's rearguards and bind it. If you did not bind, your opponent chooses 2 cards from the drop zone and bind them. So either it binds one of your opponent's rearguards and you draw, or you just straight up bind 2 cards from your opponent's drop zone, which in some cases can be a little better depending on scenario, because it relates to the second skill where Auto Vanguard. Once per turn, at the end of the battle, this card attack costs Counterblast 1, discard card from hand, stand this unit, draw -1 to the end turn. If your opponent's bind zone has at least 10 cards, or if you persona ride during the turn, this card gets +1 crit. So basically it's an easy restanding Vanguard that can potentially get itself some extra crit if you do persona ride or you bound enough, but the bind 10 can take a while depending on the type of deck that you build. But this card can also bind your opponent's stuff, which is better than retire, because of course many decks have less bind zone access. Overall, this is not too bad. The only thing it's really lacking is just the extra power it needs. But a restanding Vanguard with an extra crit isn't too bad, especially because during Persona Ride turn it's going to be 23k with 2 attacks, and an extra crit is actually going to be very devastating. And also, if you're trying to play this as a Dragon Empire deck, there's always a generic Soul Charge engine in the form of Eugene. And now to her partner in crime, at her own pace everywhere, Total Kagura. Of course, grade 2 with 10 power, and the skill is if your Vanguard is visible, it gets all the following. Auto, if your Vanguard is grade 3 or greater, this card can be paid with the Energy Blast 3 when placed on rearguard. Or you can just do it normally where Counterblast 1, search your deck or drop zone for up to 1 Charge Gonzalez and call it to rearguard in the same column as this unit. If you search your deck or shuffle it, which links with the second skill of Auto Rearguard, when your grade 3 or greater Vanguard attacks, if your Charge Gonzalez is in the same column as this unit gets us 5k power in the end turn. Just like the other Visible Ride Lines, they call their partner, and then their partner calls their partner, and they do some stuff. In this case, it's only some extra power. And since this one's linked to what your grade 3 attacks with for extra power, 2 attacks will make it total 10k. which is practically the same thing as the Ride Line of the Grade 2. And finally, Charge Gonzalez, which is a grade 1 with key power, and the skill is, if your Vanguard's Visceral, it gets all the following, where auto, when placed on rearguard, your opponent chooses a card from the drop zone and bind it. This is very helpful for the deck because of course you want to increase the bind count. But the second skill makes it even better, where auto rearguard, at the end of this unit boosts the total Kagura cost, put 2 rearguards in the same column as this unit to your soul, aka total Kagura and itself, and choose one of your opponent's rearguards and bind it. If you do not bind, your opponent chooses 2 cards from the drop zone and bind it. Once again, punishes your opponent if they don't have a field presence. Overall, a pretty decent combo, helps out with the soul, since as you can tell, Ema does need a soul blast too for the bind, and just this being able to basically put the soul and bind even more is just very helpful, especially if you cannot do the Persona Ride crit. And then finally, there's energy cards, the collab cards in the set, so collect them if you like, and they're going to come in triple rare foiling. And now to the new Lukier stuff. We start off with a legendary Lantern Demonic Lady Folkiller, which is a grade 1 with K power and the skill is auto, when placed on rearguard from hand, energy charge 1, which is of course not too bad, especially on free energy charge. With the second skill of auto rearguard, at the end of this unit boosts, if you energy blasted 3 or more times this turn for a cost, retire this unit and draw a card. A generic card for energy in Dark State. On place, it's energy charge 1, which is of course going to be very helpful for many Dark State deck, but if you do play cost with energy blast 3, which is basically a lot of Dark State cards do this, you can also draw an extra card with this just by retiring itself, which isn't too bad. It's basically Dark State Painkiller. And now since more decks are using energy, especially just doing energy blasting 3, which is going to be very easy for most card costs, I'm definitely going to see this being played a lot in many Dark State decks. Next, Showered Applause Dragon, which is a grade 3 with taking power, and its skill is, if your Vanguard's Pale Moon, it is treated as Pale Moon. And the main skills are auto, when placed on rearguard, if your Vanguard is Pale Moon, choose a card from your drop zone and put it to soul, which is of course going to be very helpful, especially on the choice soul charging, and it's going to be even more helpful with the next card. But anyway, third skill, count rearguard. During your turn, if placed on rearguard from soul, plus 5k. If your opponent's Vanguard is at least grade 3, plus 10k instead. Not too bad as a call target basically. Too bad it's not Silver Thorn in name, because Silver Thorn name would be very helpful as well, but it's basically a generic skill that can make itself into a big beater for one turn call from soul. But the main part that you use for this is mainly for the choice soul charging in Pale Moon. And finally, Silver Thorn Dragon Empress, Venus Luquier. Never used in the anime, by the way. It's a grade 3 with taking power and the skill is count Vanguard. During turn, if your soul has the original Lukier, plus 5k. And your opponent's Vanguard is at least grade 3, your whole front row gets plus 5k instead. That's overall not too bad, especially giving the incentive to use the original Lukier. And since this is Pale Moon we're talking about, you could actually just put this in your ride deck and basically choice soul charge your Lukier in. Which, of course, there's many ways to do it, especially since this is a Dark State deck, which there's also random soul charging. But anyway, to the main skills, act Vanguard. Once per turn, cost energy blast 3, put a card from your hand to soul, choose any number of units that are grade 3 or less with different grades from your soul and call into rearguard. So basically, compared to the original one needs to use Counter Blast, this one just uses Energy Blast. And another upside of this one is that it calls an extra unit, but of course it sacrifices the power. But not really at the same time, because the first skill basically gives you the power if you have the original Lukier and Soul, which is not too hard considering that this is a Dark State and Pale Moon deck, which has Choice Soul Charging. And speaking of the Choice Soul Charging, this second skill could literally just put the original Lukier into your soul, and it will just trigger the first skill immediately for the extra 5k buff. That already makes some decent synergy with the two skills. But it has a third skill where Auto Vanguard, when this card attacks, cost put 2 rear guards to soul, draw a card at plus 5k power and the end of that battle. If your opponent's Vanguard is at least grade 3, crit plus 1. So basically, compare this to the original, this one does it mid-battle compared to the end phase. Which is of course going to be a little better, especially when you can actually pull a little more tricks like mid-battle superior call in many cases. But not only that, it also gets a crit, which is of course going to be decent pressure. And of course the extra power is also very nice as well. So overall, of course, this is an upgrade to the original. I would actually just straight up put this in the ride deck and just choice soul charge the original Lukier, because Pale Moon and being Dark State has that option. And of course, being an evolution, it's just overall better than the original. So overall, I like it, but it doesn't really do much different to the original, so it might not actually make too much of a difference on the deck. And finally, next week, we got the Regalius piece. So that's it for the new Ema Ride Line along with the new Venus Lukier. What do you guys think of them? Overall, pretty cool. Ema, of course, it's very similar to basically Gandiva in a way where it's basically removing your opponent's rear guard, but adding a bit of Shoujo Doji of binding your opponent's rear guards as well. On top of that, adding a bit of Overlord because restanding Vanguard. And honestly, if I'm going to play an Ema deck, I would play it more as a Dragon Empire deck because there's more options to basically give you the soul charge. As for Venus Lukier, I just kind of like it because, of course, it's an upgrade to the original Lukier, and I do like the Pale Moon playstyle. But other than that, it's not really much different other than just basically being a little bit of an upgrade. But other than that, that's it for this, and see you all next time.